Welcome everybody to this Commission 2 of today's conference. My name is Tomek Kołodziejczuk. I'm from Center of Capitalism Poland. I will be just taking care of time here and welcoming our speakers. Our first speaker is Professor Ziga Turk from University of Ljubljana. He will be talking to you about intellectual dark web. So please just welcome him with your applause and give him a good audience and your attention.
Good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'll be presenting some ideas that we developed together with my friend and colleague Federico Reo from the Wilfred Martens Centers of European Studies in Brussels. So that is the think tank of the European People's Party in Brussels. In the end, you will see that one of the messages here, or one of the work that we are trying to do, is find a kind of consensus between the, let's say, liberals and the conservatives. The outline of this talk is as follows. First, I will briefly tell you what is intellectual dark web for those of you who don't know that. A few footnotes. Why footnotes? Why do we see that intellectual dark web is, why do we claim that intellectual dark web is in fact a series of stuff that Hayek already wrote about? What is this stuff? The third element. And the lessons learned, mostly about the compatibility, as I said, of conservative and liberal thought. And I will disappoint you with the message that it is not freedom that matters, but it is survival that matters. What is intellectual dark web? New York Times called them, these thinkers, an alliance of heretics. A group of public personalities who oppose what they believe to be dominance of identity politics and political correctness in academia and in the media. I'm sure you have been following many of them on social media, reading their books, etc., etc. I will be introducing some names later on. Why the footnotes? Why this idea that what we are reading today, what we are passionate about today, what we agree or disagree with today has been said already in the past? And here I will quote one of the, he does not consider himself a dark web thinker, but he's a very smart guy, Nassim Taleb. I'm sure some of you at least have also heard of him before. And he said, everything that holds in social science and in psychology has to be Lindy-proof, that is, have an antecedent in the classics. Lindy is a deli in New York City where you go to figure out which Broadway shows will last for a couple of weeks or months or years and which not. And the kind of underlying theory or heuristics is if a Broadway show has been going on for a long time, it will go on for a long time. Very simple. And this heuristics is based on the idea that humans, societies, have actually not changed very much, not over the last decade or 100 years, but the nature of man has not changed much in 1,000 years or 10,000 years. So what has held true in social sciences 10,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, as it is the case with Hayek, still holds true today. And to prove that Taleb is right about this idea, that there's nothing new basically, well, we have another quotation from Whitehead, which says basically the same, except it's not about Hayek, it's about Plato. European philosophical tradition consists of a series of footnotes to Plato. So basically, whatever in European philosophy has been discovered over the last 2,000 years has been one way or the other said by Plato already. Now the question is, why is the title of this paper not "The Dark Web is a Series of Footnotes to Plato"? Well, because Plato still may not be as relevant today as he was maybe even 200 years ago. And that is the difference is in the progress. It's another interesting author, Czech author, Tomáš Sedlacek, who discovered or rediscovered this idea that It is the progress that has changed. It is the idea of progress that has made Western civilization so different from all the others, and this idea is embedded in the Old Testament. And why is this progress important? Because progress is a recent phenomenon. So here you have this famous hockey stick chart of the GDP from the birth of Christ until today. And there has been no progress. So here you have footnotes to Plato. Plato was in this no progress era. But in this era here, the social scientists, the philosophers, the economists had to start thinking about progress and what makes progress and how things are changing. So the idea of changes becomes important, and the question of change becomes important. And actually, to be totally honest, we could also have titled this paper Footnotes to Burke and Hayek, because Burke was probably the first who tried to grasp the ideas of progress and why progress happens and how it happens. The difference between Burke and Hayek was that science made quite a big step between the time of Burke and the time of Hayek. But what Burke kind of attributed the situation of man, the progress of man to, was the, quote, mysterious march of God in the world. Very, very religious man. This was what was moving the humanity forward. And Hayek, of course, as you know, was thinking about the extended order that arose from largely moral practices, many of which men tend to dislike, whose significance they usually fail to understand, whose validity they cannot prove. So these things that you don't understand, the validity you cannot prove, it could just as well be the march of God. It could just well be an element of deity. There was, of course, another kind of progress. The progress of French Revolution, the progress of Soviet Revolution. We were celebrating the failure of this on Saturday, actually. The fall of Berlin Wall is, I think, the V-Day, the victory day against socialism. And all these ideas that say, oh, we know better than the march of God. We know better than the stuff that we don't understand, the extended order. And this is all based on a belief, most succinctly put in Karl Marx's thesis on Feuerbach work, that the philosophers should not only be describing the world, they are here to change it. This is the baseline for all these revolutions. It is possible to change the world through philosophy, through design, through human thinking, through humans designing the social affairs better than either the march of God or the extended order. And the key assumption of this Marxist belief that you can improve the world, that you can improve people, that you can change society by changing people, that philosophers can change the world rather than describe it, is based on this idea that we are born blank slate, that we bring nothing to the world, neither as individuals, neither in hardware, if you want, nor in the software of the culture and of the civilization. Which brings me to the modern footnotes. So the basic idea was there in Burke, it was there in Hayek. But over the last century, and probably very intensely over the last 20 years, there has been huge progress in genetics, evolutionary psychology, medicine, biology, that is probably vindicating those hunches that the thinkers had in the past, or that Burke had in the past, and Hayek had in a much more informed way, not so far away, not so long ago. They give scientific vindication to that, and it's all over the spread, all over the so-called dark web. Steven Pinker, he smashed, probably put the final nail into the coffin of the blank slate theory. Yes, it is still, it is this idea that we are not born blank slate, that we come to this world with some moral instincts, is still able to shock. You would still be discredited if in a debate you would say, no, 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 you cannot create anything out of any human that is born. We are not born equal in the material sense. We are born equal in the image of God, in the physical, in the abstract, in the abstract sense, in the metaphysical sense, but not physically. And it is not only that we are born with something, with some traits, with some facilities, with some features, also with some morals and with some attitudes. It is also that through the history of culture, through the progress of culture, we have been genetically changed, or these traits have been genetically modified, not 100,000 years ago, not 1,000,000 years ago, but 500, 1,000 years ago. Those who breed dogs know that it is possible in a couple of generations to create a more tame, for example, a more obedient breed of a dog, a more trustworthy breed of a dog. And this happened with the human genetic code as well. From rather robust, violent people, we have evolved into a species which is much more peaceful, quieter, but trustworthy, because that was an evolutionary advantage. And it is not only what we are brought to the world with, the genes, so the hardware of every individual humans. Richard Dawkins introduced the concept of memes, of cultural genes, of cultural elements that are propagated through history, that are propagated through culture, that are propagated through history, and that are also selected. So the selection of cultures also happens. Some societies discover ways of cooperation which are more productive, which enable bigger strength, which enable more children to survive, and some cultures don't do that. And then there is a natural selection of these cultures and of these memes through the history of mankind. And if you compare, for example, what Dawkins was writing about memes and what Hayek was writing about extended order, you have this same idea of natural and cultural selection in Hayek already. So it's, as I said, it's a footnote. So memes in the famous work of Richard Dawkins are not much more than the objects of what constitutes Hayek's cultural selection that results in Hayek's extended order. A very, very popular kind of dark web thinker, Jordan Peterson, put things from another perspective. So he was not a scientist, he's a psychologist. And his best quote is actually from his less famous book. He wrote, "Something we cannot see protect us from something we do not understand. The thing we cannot see is culture, and the thing we do not understand is chaos." And he is studying in this book ancient stories, myths, legends, and so on, and how they were creating the culture, how they were maintaining the culture. In the terms of Hayek, this would be the selection of elements of the extended order. In the words of Dawkins, this would be the memes that we were talking about. In the language of Burke, this would be God-made natural order of things. And it protects us from chaos, the violent, brutish, passionate past of the human nature. Taleb Nassim Taleb, I quoted him once already. He's a mathematician. He works on risk management. And again, his work is tying very nicely into this whole story. And he is claiming we have all these rules, we have all these cultural elements to protect us from tail risks, from very big dangers, from very big kind of black swan events that could have severe impact, severe danger to our survival. Saying the same story again. And finally, Jonathan Hyde is here a little bit different. All these guys have kind of created dichotomy between, let's say, the brutish natural order and the extended order, or blank slate versus the inheritance of morals and values. Jonathan Hyde has this beautiful moral foundation theory where he is proving through surveys and so on that yes, we are born with certain moral foundations on top of which we are building things. And these moral foundations with which we are born with are very much like kind of Stone Age instincts. But on top of that, we have built culture, we have built extended order that proved to be evolutionary, more successful than some other work. So lessons learned. There is a compatibility between what the conservatives and what the liberals believe. Yes, I think we have written a whole paper on this over the word limit. I'm not sure if this conference will publish the papers, otherwise we will put it somewhere on the web where you can get this argument in a time longer than 15 minutes with all the citations, literature, and so on. I think it's fairly obvious that the words of Hayek are echoed in the intellectual dark web. The reason for this is also, I think, that if something is true, then there are not many ways in which you can say it. If something is false, of course, you could have a very big difference of falsehoods. What is the growing consensus among the conservatives and the liberals? The conservatives respect this so-called march of God through the world. And they want to conserve the results of social evolutions, of the evolution of culture, of the evolution of memes that proved to be successful. So if it worked in the past, why change it? This is the kind of motto of the conservatives. And the liberals would say, well, yes, freedom is such an evolutionary achievement. It's a key element of the extended order. So the difference between liberals and conservatives would be, conservatives would say, well, yeah, freedom is good, but it's not kind of the overarching principle like the socialists would have equality. All these kind of principles are dangerous. Results of evolution, on the other hand, are empirically proven. So I would say Hayek was a conservative because he was a liberal. Those of you who have read him, he was kind of very embarrassed to be called conservative, but I mean what he said there by all kind of practical evaluation of things is conservative thinking with a view to the future. And with a view to the future, yes, future matters. And we should all be concerned, of all of us who are somehow involved in public matters. Future matters. And there are relevant and irrelevant things about this future. The irrelevant thing is, does something bring more freedom to individuals? Does it extend human rights? Does it increase inequality? Does it increase happiness? This is all, sorry to say, this is all irrelevant. What is relevant is, does a change contribute to survival? This is why we are where we are, because we survived, because our ancestors survived, because our ancestors had more children than some others' ancestors. And the survival is about the genes, and it's the survival of the memes, of the culture. So I would conclude with another quote from Nassim Taleb. What is rational is that which allows for survival. Thank you.
We have time for one question, so please raise your hand. Professor, pick the one, and...
Any?
There's...
Thank you, Professor Turk. It was very interesting. I agree with your presentation very much. I have only one thing to add. I'm not so sure whether we can regard, if we think on social sciences, the whole history of European thought from Plato to the 19th century as footnotes to Plato alone, no? Because there were some important people inside which probably would belong to the dark net, intellectual net today, for instance, St. Thomas of Aquin or others. What I find really interesting is what happened in the history of European thought with the Cartesian turn, when man gave up the idea that he is in the hands of God and interprets the reality alongside his own judgments. There is a book which I would recommend, you probably know it. This has been written by John Paul II. It's called Memory and Identity. And there he explains this concept. So for everybody interested in this argument, I would recommend it to read it. Thank you.
Thank you. This was more of a comment than a question, but if we believe that it is the result of social or cultural or mimetic evolution, and that we are a product of that, and that this was the mechanism of development, of growth, of progress, and so on. Actually, religion is instrumental in that, because if you want to have an evolution, you must have memory, you must have replication of the old into the new so that the selection can work. That's why we have DNA, which makes sure that our children are very much like the parents and the selection can work. And religion was a kind of DNA for society. And I agree with what you are saying in evolutionary terms. There has not been a society, a successful society that has survived without a kind of supernatural, religious, godlike concept. And the fact that we are here today and that we are a kind of more or less atheistic society is not a proof that this works. The proof will come in 100 to 200 years. This is the space of this evolution. And we could talk about many other modern things that are being introduced into our society, for which we could claim there has not been a society that would have that feature, that would be surviving to date. So why do we think we will survive? But it's worth trying, because it's also through trying that evolution happens.
Thank you.